Welcome back. It's a bright day. It's a new adventure. Just like it's a bright day, it's a bright suit. Was that how that sentence was supposed to go? No, but we do it and we keep it. And this is the Orange Suit Guy Show. I am Kyle Allen, the Orange Suit Guy. I have traded in the bleachers of Boone Pickens Stadium for a desk in front of you, and this is my life on camera, shared with all of you, and I am very, very excited today. Today is a very special episode of the Orange Suit Guy Show. I do want to kind of address the elephant in the room first. There was a show last week. But if you are in the YouTube feed for the video did not go live. There was an issue with the video file in recording. So last week's show is up on all of the DSPs, all those digital streaming platforms, audio only from last week on Spotify, on Apple Music, whatever it is that you prefer to use for your digital streaming platform. Orange Suit Guy Halloween episode is up on those. But we are back with the video feed this week, and I'm stoked for it because winter sports have arrived at Gallagher-Iba Arena here in Stillwater. It's basketball season. It will be wrestling season. We're still going to talk a little bit of football. Don't fret, football fans, because as hard as this season has been, as hard as the last two seasons have been as an Oklahoma State football fan, it's still going on. It still behooves me, both as a fan and as a show host and as a journalist and as a fill-in whatever you want right there, to talk about it. But there have been 4 basketball games so far this week, and we are 4 days into the week. 3 women's basketball games, 1 men's basketball game. I would love to also talk about Cowboy wrestling, but despite my best efforts and despite everything I have tried and worked for in my life, I'm still not quite Nostradamus. I still can't quite predict the future, and Cowboy wrestling starts tonight at Gallagher-Iba Arena against Stanford at 7 o'clock. I am very, very, very excited to see what David Taylor can bring in his second season to the mat with Cowboy wrestling. Casey Swiderski, Zach Ryder coming in off of very good off seasons. Obviously, guys like Connor Doucette is back. Troy Spratley is back. A lot of new faces, some old faces mixed in with Cowboy wrestling, and I have every reason to believe that as successful as last season was for David Taylor and Cowboy wrestling, it will continue to be so this season on the mat for Cowboy wrestling. Please, if you can, be at Gallagher-Iba and support those guys in the famous orange singlet. Like I said, we will talk just for a little bit about the football loss in Lawrence this past Saturday to the Kansas Jayhawks. And really, this was a game that went almost exactly the way that I thought it would, even down to the final score. I predicted a final score of 31-21 for this game. It ends just a little bit beyond that at 38-21. I did not anticipate that Oklahoma State would not get any defensive stops in this game. The defense has played better. The defense has done a better job of getting off the field. They've still given up their points. Most of those have come in the pass defense with a depleted secondary for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to go into. But the rush defense has played better and better and better since Clint Bowen took over those defensive play calling responsibilities. Now, unfortunately, it didn't look like that on Saturday. The game plan very much looked like, from Doug Meacham and from Kevin Johns and from Clint Bowen, kind of the triumvirate right now that's in charge of Cowboy football, to shorten the game as much as possible. You know you have those issues defensively. You know that stops are hard to come by sometimes on the defensive side of the ball. So why not just try to shorten the game? Why not try to take possessions out of the game? And for the first time all season, and in my other job, in my radio show job, I said that this was the week, and it pained me that it took 4 road games, but I said this was finally the week that Oklahoma State football would score an offensive touchdown in a road football game. If you remember, we were averaging 3 points a game in road games this year. 3 points that we scored against Oregon, 0 points that we scored against Texas Tech, 13 points that we scored against Arizona, but the one touchdown that we scored in that game was a defensive pick six late in the game. So really only 6 points offensively in that game, which averages out to 9 points. Divided by 3 is 3 points a game. It's easy math. I can do it, and I'm not that good at it. It had to come at some point that offensive touchdown on the road was going to happen, and it did not take long in Lawrence, Kansas. It was on the first drive. The first drive, Zane Flores gets back in. I want to talk about Zane Flores for a second. By far the best we have seen him look, and I know that Kansas has had some issues defensively. They're a very middle-of-the-pack team defensively. They don't have some of the playmakers that they have been accustomed to having on the defensive side of the ball. There's a reason they came into the game 4-4. They're just kind of an average team across the board. And Zane Flores looked like the quarterback that we had advertised for so long, waiting and waiting and waiting in Stillwater to get his opportunity. The first drive of the game hits a wide open Shamar Rigby in the end zone to score a touchdown on the opening drive. And for the first time in a long time, we were in a game at halftime within shouting distance. We were down 10-7 at half because of a missed field goal and a blocked field goal. Otherwise, we probably go in 13-10 with the lead at halftime. Uncharted territory for this team at any time since the UT Martin game to start the season. And that, I think, would have done wonders for the team. Again, you give up 38 points. The only time that Kansas doesn't score the football in this game is the last drive of the game because they take 2 knees and run the clock out and end the game that way. So another loss for Cowboy football, but we're not going to have a football player spotlight because that's going to come later in our basketball talk, but it would have been a shoe-in for Zane Flores. It would have been a shoe-in for Zane Flores this week with the way that he played, the stats that he put up, the game that he played. It looked like coming back from injury on the road is hard, but coming back against this Kansas squad may have been exactly what he needed, especially going into a bye week to get ready for 11 a.m. next Saturday here back at home against the Kansas State Wildcats. But what we are here to talk about in sports today is Cowboy and Cowgirl basketball. I have been to all 4 of the games this week for both teams combined. There are 2 games as well on Sunday, both teams in action on Sunday afternoon. I will be there for both of those games as well. A lot of basketball have I watched this week, and it's been, for the most part, a very fun ride. We'll start on the men's side. Cowboy basketball starting their season on Tuesday night at home against the Golden Eagles of Oral Roberts. Connor Dow making a return game to Stillwater after 2 seasons with the Cowboys, now a member of the Oral Roberts Golden Eagles. Started for them, I believe only had 1 basket, maybe 2 baskets, was actually a pretty good presence on the defensive side of the ball. A 95-71 win for Steve Lutz and the Cowboys. And this is still a weird kind of situation that Steve Lutz finds himself in with this team. This team is objectively more talented than the team that he had last year. This team is objectively in a better spot to compete and to win games, has a lot of good players around. Parsifala looked very good on the inside. Mili Vukovic backing him up had a very strong game inside as well, particularly in the second half. There's still some issues defensively with this team, and Steve Lutz was very open about that in his post-game press conference, and a big part of it as well is that 3 players that he expects to be rotational guys, Anthony Roy, Isaiah Coleman, Lefteris Matsoukas, all were inactive against Oral Roberts. This is a team that has not practiced or played with everybody healthy yet. There's still a feeling out process that's happening with this team. That's a scary thought going into a game Sunday against a good Texas A&M squad, but you have several games in this basketball non-conference. That's kind of what the basketball non-conference is for at the end of the day, right? It's kind of there, it's kind of designed to play some smaller opponents, play some teams that you can get in, get yourself into conference season form, and get ready to go. Oral Roberts is not a bad team by any stretch. They've had a rough go in the last few years, but a lot of good pedigree at Oral Roberts within their athletics department, but specifically within their basketball department. A new coach into Tulsa to take over that team comes from the Steve Alford coaching tree, has Steve Alford's son on his staff. I think that this is going to be actually a pretty decent ORU basketball team, all things considered. They have their struggles as well, and those were evident. But when Oklahoma State wasn't quite able to lock down defensively, and that was the case a lot, it was a close game. It was a 4-point game at halftime because Oklahoma State was not locked down defensively. And I'm not saying anything that the team doesn't know. I'm not saying anything that Steve Lutz didn't say from his own mouth in his post-game press conference, that they weren't very good defensively in the first half. They played a much better defensive game in the second half, and the offense was there. The offense was flowing. In a 40-minute game, if the offense isn't flowing, you don't score 95 points, right? They find a way to score 95 points in a regulation basketball game in 40 minutes against a Division I opponent. Scoring 95 in an exhibition against Auburn in overtime is one thing, but this is in 40 minutes against a Division I opponent. This team is going to be good offensively, especially without Isaiah Coleman and Anthony Roy out there, who are two very good scorers of the ball, to go alongside Christian Coleman and Victorious Miller, who also had very good games scoring the basketball. A lot of things to be optimistic about for Cowboy basketball once they get everybody in, get everybody healthy, and start to kind of, I think, focus in a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball, making some stops, getting out in transition, doing the things that they want to do. The issue is, and I'm going to kind of go on a little bit of a soapbox, with a lot of basketball players, and I think the guys on this team are great, but a lot of basketball players do not prioritize defense. What is sexy in the world of basketball? It's scoring the basketball. It's going out and putting up 25, 30 points a game for your highlight tape, for your mixtape, for your huddle film, whatever it is. The defensive highlights aren't what get the attention, right? What gets talked about in football? In football, it's always about the quarterbacks. It's always about the running backs, the wide receivers, the guys that are going out putting up a bunch of points on the board, because that's the flashy side of the game. The defensive side of the game isn't flashy. It's gritty. It's not as fun as someone who's played sports. It's not as fun most of the time. Unless you're just wired as a defensive-minded guy, it's not as fun to play on the defensive side of the ball in whatever game you're playing as it is on the offensive side of the ball. But in the game of basketball, it's probably the most important because you're the guy playing both sides of the field. Both sides of the court, both sides of the ball. In football, you can come off the field as a wide receiver and say, okay, those 11 guys are going out there to play defense. That's their job. My job is not to play defense. My job is to catch a football and score points. My job is to throw a football and score points. My job is not to stop the other team from doing so, right? In basketball, you don't have that ability. You have to go score the basket and then get back and play on the defensive side of the ball. So teaching defense, teaching teams to be good defensively is a challenge. It's a challenge that I think Steve Lutz is up to. It's something that Steve Lutz has talked at length about, right? And so I think this team will get better and better and better defensively as the year goes on, because I think that those players are bought into the system. I just think that it's not always quite there clicking in their head of, I have to be a good defensive player, because if I'm a good defensive player, then the ball is live. We're not taking the ball out of our own basket and going up into the half court that way. We can get it on the move, play more fluid, and that creates easier shots, right? On the women's side of things, they've had 3 games this week. I have been at Gallagher a lot covering this women's basketball team, covering JC Hoyt and the girls that she has out there, and this has been fun. None of these games have been close. One close quarter, and that was Wednesday night, the first quarter against East Texas A&M. Again, I think a 4-point difference at the end of that first quarter before Oklahoma State really pulled away and won that game convincingly. That was the only game they didn't score 100 points in. They score 100 points in their opening game against New Orleans on Monday night. They were back in action last night against Langston University, a non-NCAA opponent, but a team that on the second night of a back-to-back is still good repetition. J.C. Hoyt made a good point in her post-game press conference about, hey, not only are teams playing a lot of non-D1 opponents in the regular season this year, but we want to put our team in a position where they're playing back-to-back games because we're going to be in tournament settings. We're going to be in the Cayman Islands over Thanksgiving. We're going to be in the Big 12 tournament. We're going to be in the NCAA tournament. That's the goal for this team, right? In the NCAA tournament, you're not playing in back-to-back games, but you're playing in close proximity games, right? And there's always a possibility you will, at some point in the Big 12 tournament, play in back-to-back games. In this Cayman Islands tournament, they're going to play in back-to-back games. This is something that they have to be used to doing in order for them to have success. So I love this scheduling. I love putting the games in back-to-back nights. It makes my job a little bit harder as a journalist, having to go back and forth multiple days in a row. And I've done it 4 days in a row between men's and women's to get to Gallagher-Iba to cover this team, both on the men's and women's side. But when they're putting up the performances that they're putting up, it makes it enjoyable. It makes it an easy enough job to do. And I'm going to spotlight a couple of the women on this team. They scored 35 points in the first quarter against Langston. They were up 35-4. You heard that right, 35-4 at the end of the first half. I believe the halftime score was 60-14. I think that was the halftime score, if I remember right. But Haley Timmer and Lena Girardi are two players who have combined, if my math is right, combined for 53 points over these games and have been absolute presences, especially behind the arc. Lena Girardi, a true freshman from New York, obviously the daughter of one of my favorite baseball players growing up, Joe Girardi. I've seen Joe around. I haven't gotten the opportunity to speak to him yet. That will come. I will make time for that. Haley Timmer has played a lot of college basketball. She's a fifth-year player, graduated from South Dakota State, is coming over from South Dakota State to play her final season here in Stillwater, and has been a welcome addition to the team, has been a phenomenal offensive player. Lena Girardi, 9 3-pointers against Langston, which is a freshman record at Oklahoma State. Both of these players, the way that the Oklahoma State women's offense is structured, is there's inside presence. You know, Staley Hurd and Prez Zagarevba and some of these players that want to be inside. Micah Gray can score from anywhere on the floor, but Jaden Wooten can score from anywhere on the floor. This team kind of revolves around perimeter performance, whether that's Amari Whiting or whether that's Haley Timmer or Lena Girardi. They have these girls who are phenomenal three-point shooters. And so Haley Timmer and Lena Girardi, I'm going to spotlight this week on my player spotlight. I couldn't pick one or the other because they've both been absolutely lights-out players. They're both very humble players. I've had the opportunity to speak to both of them, and are exactly the type of players that you want on your roster if you're J.C. Hoyt. They continue to get better defensively. Haley Timmer is actually a pretty good defensive player. Lena is growing into that role. She's got a great eye for the ball. She's been on the receiving end of a lot of turnovers that the defense has forced. She's going to continue to grow into that as she gets more and more accustomed to playing at the Division I level, but has come in offensively as an absolute threat from behind the arc, not afraid to shoot the ball, but also not afraid to pass the ball and put a player into a great situation. This is a free-flowing offense. This is going to be a team that's really, really fun to watch. If you're an Oklahoma State fan, get to Gallagher-Iba, support Cowgirl basketball, because those girls deserve it. Those girls are playing incredible basketball. They had a great year last year, ended earlier than they would have wanted to, right, with the loss in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I believe to Haley Timmer and South Dakota State. I think that's the team that beat them. But this is a program that J.C. Hoyt has breathed life into put just a shot in the arm for, and I'm excited. I love that I get to be there and watch these girls play just as much as I am excited that I get to go watch the men play. Right? This is a fun time of year at Gallagher-Iba. This is the year that I think we can really get the rowdy back into Gallagher-Iba, and that's going to bring us into our second segment of the show, because I am going to talk about bringing the rowdy in its finest form. I didn't have the patience to talk about this game in March on an anniversary date when it took place, but this is still, for the rest of time, my favorite game in the history of Cowboy basketball. It was a game that I watched live as a kid. I could still tell you everything you need to know about this game, and I'm going to leave you in the dark and let you think about it for just a second. We'll be back when we open the archives here on the Orange Soup Guy Show. Today's trip to the archive takes place in the state of New Jersey, but if you think that this game has anything to do with schools like Rutgers, schools like Princeton, maybe even the New Jersey Institute of Technology, Division I basketball program out at NJIT, then you're not quite on the right track. I told you this is a basketball game. I told you it took place in March. If you know Oklahoma State basketball, this one should be an absolute shoe-in for you to have popped off immediately what this game is. This game is still the most fun. I've said that before. The most fun I've ever had watching an Oklahoma State basketball team and watching a single game with Oklahoma State basketball. This is March 27th, 2004 in East Rutherford, New Jersey, the 2004 Elite Eight between Oklahoma State and St. Joseph's. This is the game that sent Oklahoma State to its most recent Final Four trip down in San Antonio. The last 2 minutes of this game, right? Things kind of all over the place for both squads. The game going back and forth. It was a typical Eddie Sutton game, so there weren't a whole lot of points scored. We want to talk about playing defense on the basketball court. That was Eddie Sutton's calling card. He always had phenomenal defensive teams, played a slower, more methodical style of basketball. This was also back in the era of basketball where there was a 35-second shot clock in men's basketball. 35-second shot clock, which meant that you could hold the ball forever. There were not nearly as many possessions in the game of men's basketball at the collegiate level as there are now, with the shorter shot clock, with the 30-second shot clock. It's one of those things, and actually maybe shorter than that on the men's game now. That might be a factual error that I have to go investigate later. But it's certainly not a 35-second shot clock anymore for men's basketball. This game ended 64-62. And it was every bit as close as that score indicates. St. Joseph's was the number 1 seed going into that bracket. Oklahoma State was a 2 seed in that side of the bracket. These were the two teams that were expected to meet in the Elite Eight. St. Joseph's at the time was a phenomenal basketball powerhouse. So was Oklahoma State. These were two household names. Everybody knew Oklahoma State and St. Joseph's. That St. Joseph's team had at least two that I remember off the top of my head, players who were longtime NBA players after their time at St. Joe's was done, led by Delonte West and Jameer Nelson. Jameer Nelson was kind of the heart and soul of the team. He was the guy that really everything ran through. He was the one who ended up missing the final shot of the game to try to send. It was a 2-point shot. He was going to try to send the game to overtime from a pull-up jumper. Good defense. It didn't go that way. Oklahoma State goes to the Final Four. I can recite every word of that call on commentary. I believe that was Jim Nance calling that game, I think. I could give you every word for word of the last minute of that game on the broadcast because it is so seared into my brain as an Oklahoma State fan. This game happened when I was 11 years old, right? March of 2004. Actually, I wouldn't have even been 11 years old yet. This would have been right before my 11th birthday. I was 10 years old when this game happened. And this game may as well have happened yesterday, right? That's how clearly I remember this game. That's how clearly I remember the final sequence for Oklahoma State offensively. A 3-point basket hit by John Lucas III off of an assist from Joey Graham, where he almost lost the basketball. Joey Graham loses the handle on the basketball. Defender dives to the ball, gets himself out of position. He kicks the ball to John Lucas III, who hits a three. Oklahoma State goes to San Antonio for the Final Four. They end up losing in equally heartbreaking fashion in that Final Four matchup to Georgia Tech, who went on and lost in the national championship game. But this game and this season, this game was kind of a microcosm of the 2004 season. If you see a lot of archived footage from Gallagher-Iba at the time, this was only a few years after they built the third bowl onto Gallagher-Iba Arena. They built the third bowl, and they built Gallagher-Iba as we know it now because of these Eddie Sutton basketball teams. Up all the way through the 1990s, I believe up until 2000, there was no third bowl at Gallagher-Iba. Gallagher-Iba was a 7,500 seat arena, right? It was a small arena that they couldn't sell tickets for because there were no tickets to be found. It was the opposite problem that some basketball programs have now, that Oklahoma State's had in recent years, where now at Gallagher-Iba there's a lot of empty seats, right? And that's not an indictment on the fan base or on the program or anything like that. That's just the facts of it. It was so much not the case at this point in history that they had to build a third bowl of seats and double the capacity of the arena in order to fit everybody inside of it, right? So that was where Oklahoma State basketball was. And if you ever hear me talk about how passionate I am about Oklahoma State basketball, it's for that reason. This is the era that I grew up in with Oklahoma State basketball. I grew up with those Eddie Sutton teams that you walked in to Gallagher-Iba as a visiting team and you knew you had no shot of walking out of this building with a win because everything was so loud and so crazy. The crowd is literally right on top of you. It is a very difficult place to play a basketball game as a visiting fan when the building is at its peak. There's a whole generation now of Oklahoma State basketball fans who have never been able to experience that. They've only ever experienced a Gallagher-Iba that's half full, a third full, maybe 2/3 full on a good day. So I like to go back and highlight games like this to say, hey, kids, hey, young generation, hey, people who are around Oklahoma State athletics now. I know where the basketball program has been for the last 15 years. I get it. Look at where it came from. Look at what this was. Look at how insane this atmosphere is at Gallagher-Iba Arena. I didn't get a chance to participate in this personally, but there were camping. There was camping. There were tents that the students would sleep outside of the arena in order to be in a better position to get into the arena on game days to go get seats in the student section, because that's how in demand OSU basketball was. And this game was the microcosm of that. This game, you have a starting five that is still, to this day, I can rattle off their jersey numbers. I can rattle off anything you need to know about them. John Lucas, Joey Graham, Tony Allen, Ivan McFarland, Daniel Bobek. What do you want? What do you want to know about these guys? And actually, Daniel Bobek's son, Jackson, was on the team for a little while. Tony Allen and Joey Graham end up in the NBA. Joey, a first-round pick, a lottery pick to the Toronto Raptors, spends 6 years in the NBA, is now a basketball coach at the high school level here in Payne County, Oklahoma, just down the road in Perkins. I've gotten the chance to talk to Joey in recent days about this team, about this game. Joey obviously still has very fond memories of it as well. Tony Allen just recently had his jersey number retired out in Memphis with the Memphis Grizzlies. And the crazy thing about Tony Allen was that if you look at Tony Allen's pro career, he is known as just a foundational defensive player, the grind father, right? He's going to go, and this is the entire identity of those Memphis Grizzlies teams that he was a part of, that maybe he was going to give you 8 or 9 points offensively. He wasn't a huge contributor as far as putting the ball in the basket goes, but you weren't going to score on him. Tony Allen was one of the best defensive players in the history of basketball at the professional level, and it's so crazy to go back and watch his days at Oklahoma State because you knew that defense was there. He was an Eddie Sutton player. You didn't play for Eddie Sutton if you weren't a good defensive player. That was part of the expectation. That was the job, right? Was that you were going to play fantastic defense. Tony Allen was one of the highest scorers on that team. Ivan McFarland and Tony Allen kind of led the charge offensively. John Lucas was your 3-point threat. But the metamorphosis that his game underwent throughout his career is bonkers to me. When I look at people and say that Tony Allen was a phenomenal offensive player at Oklahoma State, they look at me like I'm nuts, and I say, go back to that 2004 season. Go back and see what he could do offensively when he was a collegiate basketball player with Joey Graham, with Daniel Bobbick, with John Lucas, with Ivan McFarland around him, with Terrence Crawford, any of these guys, Jonathan Weatherspoon, Franz Stain, Stephen Graham, whoever you want to input from that team into the game, go for it. This was a phenomenal team. I got off topic a little bit, but this was still a game that I can't talk about enough. I love talking about the Elite Eight game against St. Joseph's in 2004. I love talking about the 2004 men's basketball team as much as I love talking about any basketball team with Oklahoma State, even the current one. Like I said, I do believe that this is the year that there can be some real excitement in Gallagher-Iba for this basketball program. 2004 for me was the foundational year, right? I was alive for the 95 Final Four team. I don't remember it. That happened before I was 2 years old. What I do remember is that 2004 team. And so I wanted to just give that team, give Joey Graham, give Tony Allen, give Ivan McFarland a moment to shine as we celebrate the start of basketball season on the Orange Suit Guy show. I want to really give a tribute and pay homage to where my journey really started as an Oklahoma State basketball fan, and it was with that team in 2004. So there's your trip to the archive for 2004 men's basketball. And because of that, it's time to tune your ears in, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to give you a new record to listen to this week. It's time to give you a spotlight into an old record this week that I really, really love. So stay tuned because it's time for Orange Jams here on the Orange Suit Guy Show. Orange Jams on the Orange Suit Guy Show. It is where I tune your ears into everything happening in the world of heavy music from around the world. We've said it a bunch on this show that this is a safe space for all things European in the world of heavy music. It wasn't intentional that we had back-to-back Swedish bands on the new release showcase, and we're going to do something a little bit different this week. We're going to leave Sweden just for a minute. We're going to leave the country of Sweden, but we're not going to go too far. We're actually going to go a little bit further geographically into Europe. We're going to go to the country of Finland this week, just next door to Sweden. We're still in those Scandinavian countries. I can't help it. They put out great music. So this album came out this year. Therefore, it meets the criteria for the Orange Jam's new release of the week. The only caveat is that over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a record from Sabaton, we've seen a record from Avatar, and those records came out in the week that I talked about them. For the rest of the year, it's going to be a little bit difficult to do that because a lot of records now for the rest of this calendar year, for whatever reason, are not coming out on Tuesdays or Thursdays. They're coming out on Fridays. So that makes it tough to talk about them because I don't have time to listen to them. Right, so we are going to go back to earlier this year, to March of this year when this record came out. This is a man named Marko Hietala and his record Roses from the Deep. This is a solo record, the second solo record from Marko Hietala, and Marko Hietala is not a household name for a lot of music fans as a solo artist. He's known for one of the bands that he founded and was one of the lead composers for, and that's the band Nightwish. Nightwish is an incredible band. I call them still kind of a Swedish or Finnish band. They've had members from all over Europe. Flora Jansen, who is their current singer, she is actually from the Netherlands. So kind of a amalgamation of a lot of European pieces into Nightwish, but their style is very symphonic. They are a kind of a gothic style, symphonic style metal band. A lot of classical music influence. These are all classical musicians that are doing heavy music, right? Those two have way more correlation than people want to give them credit for in the grand scheme of making music, right? And so Marko left the band in 2020, officially announced that he was leaving the band in 2021. This was after the release of their record Human Nature, a good Nightwish album, don't get me wrong, and wanted to go focus on other ventures. He has other projects that he does. He kind of faded from the public eye, was kind of doing some other things with some different bands behind the scenes, and last year releases a single. Out of nowhere releases a single, and that single was called Left on Mars, and I was floored by it. And I said, wait a minute, Marko is back. Marko's making music. It sounds like Nightwish music. I have crossed state lines to go see Nightwish play live with Marko in the band. I love this style of music. I love, as a music nerd, and when I say heavy music, people immediately assume that I'm talking about deathcore or death metal or some of these really over-the-top heavy artists and heavy acts. And don't get me wrong, I love that type of stuff. I love the loud, aggressive, in-your-face, harsh style uh, music that exists, right? Bands like Lorna Shore have kind of gotten a bit of mainstream recognition because of the vocal style that they implement. But for me, it all goes back to these unique amalgamations of different things. And I love when you can implement things like opera, things like classical music. Nightwish did a phenomenal version of the title track to Phantom of the Opera many, many years ago that to this day I still think is one of the best covers of a song that's ever been done because of the original source, how the original source was kind of formed, and what Nightwish was able to do with it, with Marko and with Tarja Turunen, the original vocalist for Nightwish, kind of sharing responsibilities on that duet. Marko, by trade, is a bass player. He's the bassist even now on his own solo stuff, and brings in great musicians to play the other parts with him on guitar and on drums. This single that he releases in 2024, Left on Mars, was something I never thought would happen. And that's simply because Tarja Turunen, the original vocalist for Nightwish, is on this track. They do this track together, and Marko was the one who fired Tarja in 2005 from Nightwish after a big tour. They decide they're going a different way, and Tarja is removed from the band and has not worked with the band in 20 years. And all of a sudden, here's Marko putting out a single with Tarja's unmistakable operatic voice on it, and the song was phenomenal. And I said, we're getting music from Marko Hietala. I could not be more excited, and we waited over a year for the record to come out, and I've waited almost 2 years now to talk about it on the show. We're in November of 2025. The album came out in March, right? But Roses from the Deep is something that I will never get tired of a Nightwish song. I will never get tired of Nightwish music, right? But it's been a little while since Nightwish has put anything out, and I've gotten into a point where it's like, I want Nightwish music, but I know all of these songs. I want something different. I want something a little bit in that same vein, but just something I haven't really heard before. And here comes Marko Hietala saying, oh, if you want Nightwish music that's kind of a little bit different from a normal Nightwish record, but all of the stuff is in that same vein, guess what? Here's my solo record. Here's Roses from the Deep. And it was hard to find tracks to spotlight off of this record because the whole record is great, right? And so I kind of took the cop out of highlighting two of the singles on this song in Left on Mars and in the album opener, Frankenstein's Wife, which is, I mean, right from the jump of the record, gets you going immediately. And then the title track, Roses from the Deep, later on, which is a long song. It's one of those typical operatic metal songs that is over 6 minutes long and kind of takes you on a whole journey through a couple of different movements of the track, and that's stuff that I love. I talk about it a lot with bands even like Metallica, who are much more mainstream bands, but in their older stuff, especially in the Cliff Burton era of Metallica music, and even in the beginning of the Jason Newsted era, that they could pile so many things into these songs. If you've listened to Master of Puppets, if you listen to One, if you've listened to a lot of these really famous Metallica songs that just kind of take on these different identities as the song goes on, for lack of a better word. I love songs that can do that and kind of put movements together. And Marko does that in several ways. And Nightwish did it under his composition. He was one of the two leading composers for Nightwish when he was in the band. And where he doesn't get enough credit, where he doesn't get the due that I think is owed to him, is in his vocals. Marko was never really looked at like a vocalist. He was the quote-unquote lead male vocalist in Nightwish, but it was such an infrequent thing because Nightwish has been and will always be a female-fronted band. Whether that was Tarja Turunen, whether that was Annette Olsen, whether that was Floor Jansen, who's with the band now, whoever was in charge of the vocals was always an operatic female singer. That Marko would come in. He did the duet on Phantom of the Opera. He did some vocals on Wish I Had an Angel, which is another great Nightwish song. The vocal talent that Marko puts into this record is really what sold me on it. Because I knew the composition would be great. I knew the composition would be there. I knew musically the themes and the motifs and everything. If I could just geek out on music for a second, I knew would all be top-notch. Right? The vocals that Marko Hietala puts into place on this record are incredible. And I highly recommend this record. At some point, we will come back to an American band on the new release. We're going to get to an American band in just a second with the classic release of the week. But as long as these bands are going to keep putting things out like this, I have to keep talking about them. Expand your horizons. Listen to European music. Listen to Marko Hietala. Listen to Nightwish. But Roses from the Deep from Marko Hietala, phenomenal, phenomenal record for our spotlight of the week. And we will move now into our retro segment. And this was tough. This was tough because I had a few records that were kind of in consideration, a couple ways I wanted to go. And again, I kind of took a cop-out. But not really. I'm going to explain. So what I ended up spotlighting this week is technically two records. Technically the third and fourth record from this band. But I think it counts as one record. It counts as one record because both of those records came out on the same day, and the only thing different was one said 1 in the title, the other said 2 in the title. It's 1991's Guns N' Roses Use Your Illusion records, which came out as Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2. Again, two full-length records, but put out on the same day as one kind of big suite of music. So I'm combining them. For all intents and purposes, these are one record. The band members themselves, and I don't always recommend listening to artists speak from this generation because the rock star lifestyle has taken a toll on a lot of them. But even the band members have said, I don't necessarily remember which song is on which record. There were so many songs that we put out. I think there's 22 songs, maybe 23 songs between the two records that was put out. And I don't remember which one is on which record, but they were both on the Use Your Illusion project, right? And so, to me, this is the same thing. This is one record masquerading as two records. And for me, creatively, I think this is where Guns N' Roses peaked as a band. Everybody, when you talk about Guns N' Roses, wants to talk about Appetite for Destruction, right? They want to talk about that debut record. Appetite for Destruction is in my vinyl collection at home. I'll be very honest. There are some great songs. Obviously, some iconic songs in Appetite for Destruction, right? You want to think about Sweet Child of Mine. You want to think about Welcome to the Jungle. You want to think about songs like that, right? I love songs like Mr. Brownstone on that record as well. But there's so much more that they had to bring to the table compositionally and as creative people than they could put forward on Appetite for Destruction. Appetite for Destruction was still very much a product of hair metal at the time. Now, that record came out in 1987, getting towards the end of the hair metal period. Hair metal was kind of morphing. It was kind of taking on new life in the back half of the decade, the last few years of the 1980s. Then they put out their sophomore record, GNR Lies, and it was okay. It was fine. It wasn't. It's not a record that I go back to most of the time, outside of a couple of tracks. By the time 1991 came around, and music and culture and everything were so much different. Nevermind from Nirvana came out in 1991 and effectively was the death knell for hair metal. Grunge moved in as the new thing in the world of rock music. Bands had to adapt, especially bands that were these hair metal bands whose style and image and everything it wasn't cool anymore. It had run its time. It was a product of the previous decade. And so in 1991, Guns N' Roses was one of the bands. Say whatever you want about Axl Rose, it's probably justified. The guy knows how to compose a song. He knows how to write a song. He played piano on a lot of this record. Slash is Slash. The guitar parts are going to be incredible. The riffs are going to be great. The solos are going to be great. Right? Duff McKagan is a good bass player. I think Izzy Stradlin was still in the band at the time as the second guitar player, so those accessory guitar parts are also going to be great. This was the first record that they had Matt Sorum come in on drums, coming over from the Cult. Steven Adler was let go from the band because of drug addiction and heroin addiction. Just kind of as an aside, it is cool. About 10 years ago now, Steven Adler reunited with Guns N' Roses for a few shows on a tour. And just full circle, if you knew Steven Adler's story, I don't know. This is going to sound like it's a shot, and it's not. It's me genuinely not knowing the answer to the question. I don't know that Steven Adler has ever achieved sobriety, that he's ever been clean. He was on multiple seasons of Celebrity Rehab. He was on a season of Sober House. His struggles with addiction are very, very, very well documented. Steven Adler and heroin addiction and drug addiction go hand in hand. The last headline I saw about it one way or the other was in 2011. It was 14 years ago. So I don't know the rest of his story. I hope for his sake that he has found sobriety. Obviously, you don't want to see anybody struggle with these addiction issues. But this was the post-Steven Adler era of Guns N' Roses. Matt Sorum comes on and does a great job on the drum kit for this record. The big reason that I like to talk about the Use Your Illusion project from Guns N' Roses is because if there's ever a trivia game made about my life, one of the questions will be, what is Kyle's favorite song of all time? The answer to that question is November Rain by Guns N' Roses. November Rain is one of the most well put together songs across any genre that I have ever heard. Right? I talk a lot about the songs that are these elaborate movements of songs. They're not, 6 lines in a chorus, and put together very basically. And there are songs that I love that follow that formula, right? I'm not going to come on here and say, a song can't be great unless it's 7.5 minutes long and has 4 different, distinguished movements in it. No, you can have a 2.5 minute song, a 3-minute song that's basically constructed that's a good song, right? But November Rain and some of the other songs that you will hear me talk about do such a phenomenal job. And the lyrics tell a good story and tell a cohesive story with a beginning and a middle and an end in the song. But it's really, and this is still in the era of music videos. So the music video is actually part of a series in the Guns N' Roses catalog. They put out music videos to a couple different songs that were a cohesive story that was told across songs. Um, Korn actually did something very similar to this at the end of the decade with the Freak on a Leash and Falling Away From Me videos. That's a topic for a different day. But there was this emphasis on cohesion. And this is a very, very long song, but musically, even beyond the story that is being told with the lyrics, the music is telling the story itself, and it just builds and it builds and it builds, and it ends with just this crazy crescendo, incredible music composition that has always bothered me that it gets cut out of the radio version of the song because there's no lyrical content to it, and so radio stations don't want to spend the airtime playing this long instrumental part of the song. It really doesn't do the song justice for me. But even beyond November Rain, some of the great tracks on this project, November Rain is there, Don't Cry is there. That song actually has different versions on both halves of the record, and they're both very good. Just a couple little lyrical changes is the only difference in those. And then the song Civil War, um, again, another one of these long constructed methodical songs that you don't think of from a hair metal band, right? This is post hair metal. This is not flashy and drug fueled stuff, although there was definitely still a lot of those issues. If you listen to some of the other tracks on these records, um, it's very apparent they write about their struggles with addiction. All of them have had that in this particular band. It's caused a lot of the tumultuousness and the relationships and things like that, as those things do. Civil War, I am not pro or against any kind of overly political message in a song. I'm not a particularly politically minded person myself. I have my beliefs, but I don't really talk about them. And as a musician, I don't really write about them in my music. It's just not how I choose to use that creative outlet. This is a very strong kind of political statement from Guns N' Roses in Civil War, but again, is done very, very well. And is not treated like a punk rock song. It's not treated like a song that says I have to get my political ideology into it. It's treated like a great journey of a song that just happens to deal with things in its lyrics that are political in nature. And so if you can do that and do it in a great way, I think regardless of whatever your political beliefs are, songs can be great. And Civil War is a great song because of it. So that record's now been out for over 30 years. And I am aching for more. I know Guns N' Roses is not the band to do it anymore, but I am aching for the next wave of heavy music to kind of take on this identity of going through these motifs and doing these great things. I had to talk about November because we're in November now. It's always on November 1st, the first song that I play, and then I play it a million times throughout the rest of the year as well. But we're going to end Orange Jams, and we're going to go from one end of the 90s to the other. I talk about the 90s a lot because I'm from the 90s. 90s babies represent on the Orange Suit Guy show, all right? But we're going to go to the other end of the 90s to talk about something just as iconic in the film world as a band like Guns N' Roses is to the music world. Although, in both cases, whether it's this movie that we're going to talk about, whether it's Guns N' Roses, I kind of have mixed feelings and mixed emotions about them. But it's going to be a ride, because this is the Orange Suit Guy Horror Corner coming up next on the Orange Suit Guy Show. Today on the Horror Corner, it's a movie that I didn't watch this week to go into this show the way that I would normally do, but it's a movie that I've watched a few times throughout the course of my life. And if you know me, you know that I struggle to rewatch movies. If I rewatch a movie, it's for a very specific purpose. And for this one, it's been for a couple of different reasons. This is from 1999. This was a movie that has inspired a lot within the horror movie landscape in the years following. It took a lot of inspiration from some older movies, and through a lot of good promotional work, really kind of solidified itself as one of the most important movies in the horror calendar. This is 1999's The Blair Witch Project. I kind of wanted to get to this one before Halloween. Obviously, the calendar is what it is, and you can only focus on so many things. This movie's the first one that we're going to feature on the Horror Corner that has multiple directors. This one coming from Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And I said as I was kind of bumping into this segment that I have mixed feelings about this movie, because I do. I didn't have the luxury of watching this movie when it came out. There was no way that my mother was going to let me watch the Blair Witch Project when I was 6 years old, right? But even a few years later, when I did go back and watch it, because this movie took over the horror movie zeitgeist because of how it was done and how well it was done, especially with the budget that it had and the promotionals that went into it, I went back and watched it years later for the first time, and I don't think I really appreciated it to the level that maybe I should have. I have never been a proponent of found footage style movies. Obviously, this in the modern generation, we think of movies like Cloverfield, maybe, or Paranormal Activity, or Wreck, or Quarantine, as these found footage style movies. Super 8, which is a very good movie, implements it to an extent. It kind of is a hybrid movie between omniscient camera and found footage, handycam style shooting. And both can be done really well, right? For me, the found footage documentary style, I just don't get as immersed in it for whatever reason. Last week on the show, if you listen to the show, I talked about the movie Sinister, which does a very good job of utilizing 8mm film in some aspects of the movie when it's not using the traditional omniscient camera, and using the 8mm film as a storytelling device. The found footage element of this movie does all of the favors for this movie, right? It is what was it is what made the movie be able to be marketed the way that it was. Sorry, I couldn't figure out the words I wanted there for a second. I'm trying to pay this movie a compliment, and my brain tries to shut down. But for me, it was just kind of one of those things that was like, okay, so it's some people that took a camera and went out in the woods and got lost and got killed. Great. And that's oversimplifying what the point of the movie was, because what the movie did an effective job of was show that you don't need some crazy budget with a lot of special effects and a lot of different things to make a good movie, especially in the horror movie world. You need a camcorder and some actors that can do it. This movie was largely, if not entirely, improvised, with just some lore that was built up around it. The casting notes were, we need characters who are incredibly strong improvisers to pull off these roles. There's only going to be a few roles. It's really, really minimalist. I think they said they shot this movie in about 8 days. And so for what they were able to pull off in that time frame with that budget, with the amount of money that the movie made, you can't say that the movie didn't work. I struggle with a lot of found footage movies. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about my film watching palette and tastes, but it's always been a harder sell for me to say this is a found footage style movie. This is what you're going to want. This is what you're going to love, right? It's never really gone that way for me. So it's tough for me, although some things that I will say very, very complimentary about this movie. It was the absolute right decision that Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez made to never show the Blair Witch. I remember when I first watched the movie and the ending sequence comes and everything comes full circle of, hey, here's this legend of this man who killed children in his basement in pairs and had one of them facing the wall in the corner. And the last shot of the movie comes, and you're down in the basement of this house, and everybody has been killed except these two people. And the camera shows a guy not responsive, standing in the corner, facing the wall, before the person holding the camera goes down, and everything cuts to black. When I first watched this movie, I saw that as the storytelling device, and I said, that's great, but I've spent this whole time, and it's not a long movie, but I spent this whole time wanting a witch. I spent this whole time wanting to see the Blair Witch. We've seen the symbology. We've heard the noises, right? We've seen all of these things. We know that this creature, this character, this whatever, man, monster, ghost, whatever is out there. I want to see this character. And you never get to, right? But I think that because of the way that the movie was shot, with the handycam style footage, and with the story that's being told, it would have not worked nearly as well, regardless of what you went into with the witch's reveal. Whether it would have been, what we think of as an old witch, whether it would have been a monster, whatever it would have been, right, in a reveal, I don't think it would have been as effective as, hey, this person was attacked, and the camera hits the ground, rolls for a couple seconds, and then cuts. And that's it. Like that was such an effective moment that I grew to appreciate. Right, it was hard because I didn't appreciate it nearly enough the first time that I saw it, and I am a very big fan of that now, especially in the promotional afterward. When you think about the actors not really making any appearances, when this is being treated as a documentary. This is being treated as, hey, a few friends went out in the woods to try to find this witch, and this is their story that was told. And it wasn't treated like it was a movie. That's why it did so well at Sundance, and why it eventually got the theatrical release, and why it became the figure that it became within the horror movie world. It drew from very similar concepts like The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is a movie that I cannot get into. I'll be very honest. If anybody's watching this and loves that movie, great. It's the progenitor of progenitors of this style of movie, and it's just a slog for me to get through. So I can't do it. But I like kind of modernizing that take. They also admittedly took a lot of inspiration from Jaws, and if you remember the movie, if you remember in Jaws, they do a good job of, there's not a lot of shark in that movie. There's a lot of suspicion of shark. There's a lot of rumors of shark. There's a lot of implications of, hey, I think there's a shark. There's very little shark in the first Jaws movie, and it makes the moments that the shark is actually on camera super effective as a literary device. So they take that concept and say, we're going to do that with our witch, but we're never even going to show the witch. The witch is going to speak and move and act entirely through symbology, entirely through this symbol that is constructed out of sticks, entirely through noises in the woods to try to disorient people. That's what our villain is going to be. There doesn't need to be anything on camera for it. And so that is something that I will give the movie a lot of credit about, because that's something that's not used as often in movies anymore, right? It's so much, we have to maximize the amount of time that the villain is here. Like, people are paying to see the villain. They want to see the villain do villain stuff. They want to see the monster. They don't care about the rest of the characters. The characters are a means to an end to get monster time or murderer time or demon time, whatever it is on camera, that there's no room for that suspension, that suspense rather, to build up the way that it does in this film. So I'll give the movie credit where it's due, and obviously was super iconic. I mentioned Wreck and Quarantine and Cloverfield and Paranormal Activity and all of these movies that were heavily influenced by the original Blair Witch Project. You don't need to go into the sequels. There's 2 sequels to Blair Witch. It spawned novels. It spawned a whole universe and lore before that was even really cool, and everything had to have a universe attached to it. It kind of did a lot of that with Blair Witch. You don't need to waste your time. Blair Witch Book of Shadows is not a good movie. It's not. I've seen it. There was a remake that came out a few years ago, or a continuation I didn't see, but something else in the Blair Witch universe that I think was just called Blair Witch, and I didn't watch it. I wasn't particularly interested in it. I don't think that that's a universe that needs a lot of continuation. So it was something that I watched the first movie. I watched the second movie on morbid curiosity and was not a fan of it. Stay away from anything else Blair Witch related. But the original Blair Witch Project, as a symbol of horror cinema, as a staple of the scary movie world, is something worth your time. I don't really get into it. I don't really love it the way that some other people do. The critics, the Rotten Tomatoes score through the roof for this movie, and again, I understand why. So if you really love horror movies and for some reason haven't ever gone back to see this movie, go see it. It's worth watching. It's worth your time. Even if I'm not going to give a glowing review of it, it does do some things very, very well. That is 1999's The Blair Witch Project on the Orange Suit Guy Horror Corner. And guys, that's it. That's everything I've got for today's episode. So maybe you learned something. Maybe you're excited about Oklahoma State basketball or wrestling the way that I am. Maybe you're excited to go listen to some more European music, and by all means do that. Maybe you want to go listen to a long artistic musical project from the early 1990s. Do that too. And maybe you have a new movie to watch. In this case, an old movie to watch. Whatever I can do to benefit your life, I'm all about it. But above all, I hope that you had a good time. I hope that you had fun. I always have a blast doing this. And if there's one thing, as always, that I want you to remember, it's that life is always better in an orange suit. Take care, guys.